We got beautiful little chalets deep in the mountains. We got beautiful glamping sites. So there's a lot of possibilities to really explore.
So just 1 second, because we are just now live, and I'm going to go off camera. So I'm going to let John do his thing. And welcome everybody. Thank you.
Hello, it's John Florescu. I'm here in Bucharest on Valentine's Day, and so quite happily we have a couple who are Valentines for many years and been married together, and they're joining me from Romania as well. So both our guests are here. Silke Knebel, who's in I think the Carolinas. I'd like to thank her for her help in putting us together and briefing us and giving us a different subject from the usual heavy political, military, war, to a subject that is bright and uplifting, which happens to do with this fantastic project they have, in essence, to create a second Yellowstone in Europe, which is a beautifully bold ambition, and they're well underway, and they have been active at this since the early 1990s. By way of detail, Christopher Promberger is German of origin, I believe. He studied at Munich University, both in forestry and wildlife. And his wife, Barbara, is Austrian, who studied at Graz and Vienna in biology and zoology. They have worked in other countries, not just Romania, but Armenia, Belarus, Croatia, and Turkey. So they're extremely well informed. This has been part of their life. And I noted something interesting in your bios, that you studied predator-prey relationships, conflict management between carnivores and livestock, which is an interesting phrasing, which made me think, who's eating whom? So that's my first question. Who is eating whom in that area of study that you dug into?
Well, normally it should be the large carnivores eating the livestock, not the other way around.
Okay, all right, good. And what kind of animals?
Well, we were both actually fascinated from as early in our career by large carnivores, European large carnivores, meaning wolves, bears, and lynx. So the Eurasian lynx is considered a large carnivore because they're eating large prey like red deer, roe deer, chamois. And so this dynamic was always really fascinating to us. But of course, being large carnivores, they sometimes can also attack livestock, which then, of course, gets us immediately into a conflict situation also with human interests.
Terrific. Well, we'll circle back. Go ahead, Christopher. You had something to add.
Yeah, and we started off to study the wolves. That was the first species. Then we said we have to add the other large carnivores. And eventually we figured out actually that there's 4 large carnivores here, which is wolves, bears, and lynx, obviously, but it's also humans. Sort of that was a very interesting thing because humans were on the one side also, of course, they're carnivores, they're predators, but they're somehow in between. Not that the wolves would eat the people, but the wolves would eat the livestock of the people. So it was a very, very interesting situation, especially because by then in the 90s, when we studied them, sort of the understanding was that wolves can live in the big wilderness areas like Alaska, northern Canada, and Siberia, and that's it. And we found out, actually, we discovered here that in Romania, at the foot of the mountains, all around the Făgăraș Mountains, that was where we were studying wolves, they were living alongside people. They walked in at night, they walked into the villages, and we've done a documentary about a pack of wolves that was living at the outskirts of Brașov. Brașov is one of the large Romanian cities with about 250,000 people. And at night, they were just sort of finding a lot of food inside the city. In the parks, they were hunting rabbits. On the garbage dumps, they were hunting dogs and cats and rats. And whatever scraps they found. And it was an amazing experience to see that all these myths about wolves needing the big wilderness is actually not true, that wolves are a species that can very well cope with people if people accept them and if people let them be. And this was also for us the first time that we figured out that Romania is something very, very special, very different from the other European country, because it still has this way of living together with livestock and together with the large carnivores.
Let me ask you a question and start on the personal side, if I may. How did you two meet?
Well, we met here in Romania. So Christoph had started a research project on wolves, preliminary, and I just was really looking for a place where to study wolves. And of course, I was also drawn to North America, to Canada, which had this, image of being, the wildest place on earth. And but then I heard and learned about this German guy that is doing some research in Romania, and then I thought, wow, that sounds interesting. So in '95, I came the first time to Romania, but then I have to say it was really it was still the rough East basically. I remember my parents were all in tears when I left Vienna, and midnight. So I got on the train towards this unknown country by then to most of the Central Europeans, and it was a fascinating journey, also a journey traveling a little bit back in time, and a lot of things were still miserable by then. Just after the fall of communism, people used to be very suspicious towards foreigners, quite closed, and so it was quite difficult in the beginning. But then seeing these amazing landscapes, this beautiful nature, all this wildlife that in Central Europe had been completely lost, that was just absolutely
so it was ideas before the tug of the heart. It seemed that came first, if I got the sequence of things.
Exactly, yeah.
The ideas came first. Were either your parents into conservation, or what were your parents' background, if I may ask?
I mean, my father was chief of forestry in the Bavarian forest. So I grew up in spending a lot of time in the forests and around wildlife and so on. So I had a very, very close connection to conservation from childhood on.
Well, I grew up in the countryside, so all my relatives are real mountain people, and I think it was a bit the extreme, because most of my cousins and friends that age, they all were fed up with the countryside. They all wanted to leave for the big cities and find good jobs. For me, it was different. I really enjoyed being in nature and really enjoyed being in the countryside.
So it all seemed very natural in many ways. I mean, it's sort of in your blood to some extent. It's quite a remarkable story in a sense that your backgrounds, both in your family backgrounds and your thinking, could inevitably sort of pull you together in this direction, that you end up in Romania. The Carpathian Foundation is reasonably well known, but I don't know if everybody on this call on this podcast knows. Could you just give us an overview of what it is, the Carpathian Foundation?
Yeah, Foundation Conservation Carpathia is now, by the end of this year, celebrating its 15th birthday. And it was founded with a very, very particular purpose. That was sort of in the second half of the 2000s, when forests were restituted to the former owners in Romania, or to the heirs of the former owners, because many of these former owners were not alive anymore. And where we saw that this was creating a lot of pressure in some areas upon the forests, because a lot of these people got forests back. They didn't even know really where it was. There was no personal relation to this forest. And for them, it was appealing to rather sell these forests and do something else with their money, invest it into whatever else. And so what happened by then was that a lot of logging companies came in and they bought up these forests and started to do really terrible things here. So we felt like, if this is a threat, it's at the same time an opportunity, because if these forests are for sale, and there is this big amount of forests which are for sale, they can also be purchased for conservation, not just for cutting them down, but also for conservation.
Safeguarding, yeah.
And so we were lucky to meet by then in 2000, I think it was 2006 or 2007, a very wealthy individual who was very much into conservation, a Swiss American individual who already by then had a big foundation in the United States, in Washington, D.C., the Wyss Foundation. and Mr. Wies was involved in similar projects worldwide by purchasing land and then creating protected areas. And so when we presented this idea to him, he was actually the one who said, once he saw the extent of the Fagrash Mountains, he said, this is a European Yellowstone. And this is how it all started. And this is how we had this idea to use this threat scenario, turn it around, create it into an opportunity for the country, for the local communities, for conservation, and do something good about this whole thing.
I see. Interesting. It reminds me a little bit in Chile, in Torres del Paine, I think it's called. I think there was an American entrepreneur by the name of Douglas Tompkins, who had the North Face company, and he also donated money precisely for the same purpose of safeguarding that beauty down there. Is it somewhat analogous to that situation, isn't it?
It totally is. And Doug and Chris are actually even founding members of our foundation. Doug has been really a person that has been traveling all over the world. I think there was not a single country on this planet that he hadn't visited. And he also one day stepped into our doors and had heard about the initiative of purchasing land for conservation. And he got really hooked up. And so we have a very tight relationship with the Tompkins. And they certainly have been also mentors for this idea of privately protecting the forests and then turning it back in the form of a national park to the state.
How big would this national park be? If you succeed, I guess you're still trying to convince the locals, right? Some of them to come on board, right? And so that way you can ring fence the whole thing. And as you put in one of your videos, the biggest green space in Europe, which is a fantastic way of seeing it. How do you do that? How much of that do you already have in hand, and how far along to your objective of making it as big as you wanted to make it?
Maybe first let us comment on this expression ring fence, because that's exactly what we don't want to do. We don't want to create something that is enclosed, which is not available for people anymore, because that is a very, very important thing, especially here in Romania. Local people have not had rights on land or about land for so many decades. And this is something that we have to exclude from the very beginning. So it needs to be a park that involves both biodiversity conservation and the rights and the economic uplifting for local communities. And so if we talk about the size, we have here the Fagrash Mountains are an area of over 200,000 hectares, which is about 500,000 acres of uninterrupted nature. So there is, with the exception of the Transfagarash Road, which is a summer road only, there is no villages in there. There's no, with the exception of a few cabins, there is not really any infrastructure there. So it's really, for European conditions, sort of an incredibly wild place and an incredibly rare place, because we don't have these kind of situations in Europe anymore. And so, given the fact that we have, I think, over 300 national parks in Europe, it's still, there's none of them is outstanding. There's not, like in North America, the Yellowstone, or for South America, what you mentioned, Torres del Paine, or for Africa, Serengeti or Kruger National Park. In Europe, we don't have such a national park, and this is really, a unique opportunity for Romania to create such an iconic, outstanding national park. So it would be really big.
You don't have to go to the government per se. You just go to the people who basically have been overseeing these different parts of this landmass, right? In order to bring it all in. Maybe ring fence is the wrong word. And I think you're right. It's open to everybody. But if you're going to be a Yellowstone, you'd have to be a certain size. And what's the view of the government in Bucharest? Do they have any say? Do they have any voice in this thing, or where do they fit into the equation?
Well, a national park is always a government decision, but the communities will also be key for the government to take this decision towards a national park. And this is also how we envision it. We don't want to have a national park that is, introduced top down, where people
Yeah.
actually will, be disagreeing or will be unhappy with the decision, but we really want to build it up from the bottom. So we really want to have all communities that have land in this future national park being convinced that this is actually a good idea to protect nature at the same time as actually earning a better livelihood through the existence of this national park. And we're in the unique situation here that the villages are all outside this future national park. And that is, I think, what makes this Fagarash area so unique in Europe. If you look at the map, you really have this 200,000 hectares, which is uninhabited. So once people and communities agree that this should be protected, there should not be any conflict with other interests, except of course forestry, because these forests are at the moment used economically. So this is where we really have to work hard to find economic alternatives to this forestry that is happening at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I lived many years in California. We have all kinds of parks all over the place. And I also lived in Romania for an awful long time. And I'm a little struck at the lack of sensitivity and understanding of the idea of conservation. You know well, living in Romania, if you drive off a back road, you'll see, garbage from some barbecue or people throwing stuff out the window and things like that. What do you think is the state of the appreciation for nature in Romania and among the population?
I think Romanians are people that are very, very close to nature in principle. It is, almost everybody somehow has these childhood memories of grandparents in the countryside, where you were in these little villages, where you went with granddad into the forests, and then where you went with the family, on summer vacations up into the mountains. And then when you were a student, you walked along the Fagarash crest. So I think generally Romanians love nature, and the Romanians are still very, very close to nature. But there's also, of course, this other side, which you just mentioned with garbage and so on. But I think we have to understand that things might just take a little bit longer here. And, until 1990, due to the lack of resources, everything was reusable. I remember in the early 90s when I came to Romania, you bought juice, you bought milk, you bought whatever you bought, and you brought the bottles back into the shop. So all this plastic that is now here is something that was somehow brought in by foreign companies. And we have to be very honest about it.
Yeah,
and they flooded Romania with all this plastic packaging, and there was no garbage collection. There was no recycling systems. There was nothing. And so very often, people just left it where it was, because somehow it didn't matter whether you left it there or whether you brought it back and then threw it away somewhere. That's of course, not a nice thing. And I think we are here also in Romania on a good way. There's more now selective garbage collection and so on. So things are improving. But generally, I think, the Romanians are very, very close to nature. And this is something that Romania can also use, and it could be something, this nature that we have here is something that could create a real pride for Romania. Because if you look at, sort of the economic statistics, then you have Romania and Bulgaria always sort of at the very end of the tables. If you look at conservation, if you look at nature, biodiversity, Romania is always high on the very, very top end of it. And I think it's an asset that is so far not really used yet. I mean, it's maybe also a lot of the people in government positions maybe haven't realized yet what an asset that is. But I think, given sort of, even with all the hiccups that we have now with the Ukraine war and the energy crisis and so on, I mean, the general direction definitely goes into more nature. And Romania has something that is just an incredible value. And what we have to find now is ways how Romania can better benefit of this value, and also, in terms of in economic terms.
It also can become a leader actually in Europe.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, the mere shape of your ambition should be appealing. And I think you have another thing working in your favor, essentially, is young people have different attitudes than older people, and they're much more sensitive to the need to conserve. Take us into the world of the Foundation's lands. What kind of animals are there? What kind of new, I guess bison from the United States that were all but extinct have popped up in Romania, in the Făgăraș area. What kind of species do you have, new or threatened?
Well, the good thing here is that we had almost everything still in a good, in good numbers. So I mean, it's quite unique for Europe to have really bears, wolves, lynx at good numbers, having all the prey animals like the red deer, the roe deer, the chamois, and the small mammal population. The bird life is still almost complete. What we did have to bring back, and we helped a little bit here, was the European bison, which is a relative of the American bison. And that's something that has been, super exciting, bringing a species back to a whole mountain range where it was gone for over 200 years is fascinating. And seeing the first, calves and all the, the first reproductions, and seeing the calves in the forest, and seeing how they slowly adapted the situation, that's been an incredible experience. And now we're in the 4th year of this reintroduction program, and we really see that this is now taking off, and the species is becoming a real, part of this area. And also people actually appreciate it, especially with the bison. The local communities have been responding really, really well. There's even one village now that defines itself by being the bison village.
That would make Yellowstone people jealous in the United States that you have it over in Europe. I mean, outside of vampires, of course, which Romania is famous for, there are no new species, are there, other than bison, or it's more a completing of the family of all the animals of this kind of range of forest. Is that right? I mean, you're not missing anything in this climate and this topography. Is that right?
We're still missing the vultures. Vultures have been gone also for more than 100 years now from Romania, and but this is the thing that we are tackling next. So we hope that later this year we'll be able to bring the first birds in an aviary, and then start with the reintroduction of the vulture species.
Excellent. Somebody told me you have wolves at home. Is that true?
We used to have.
Yeah, we've been raising 2 wolf cubs when they were. How long is that ago now? That is like 20 years, more than 20 years ago. I still have a couple of scars here, on my wrist or on my leg. And we did that because that was during the time we did our wolf research. We just felt like, we want to see how such wolf pups grow up, how they develop, when they start to get active, what they're doing, and so on, in order to better understand, the life of wolves out in the wild. And we got those 2 wolves from a fur farm, actually, where they were kept under not very nice conditions. And then when they were sort of in the first winter, they were killed, and the fur was taken from them. So we got those 2 pups from there, and when they were small, they slept in our bed together with us. But then when they got a bit older and they started to kill the chicken of the neighbors and so on, we had to keep them in an enclosure. But we still, for most of their life, were able to take them out every day for a couple of hours and take them for extended walks and let them run around through the forest. So that was a very, very interesting.
It's an exciting time, yeah. It was before
They
we
have
had
names? Do they have names?
Yeah, they were called Krai and Pojana.
And Pojana, like meadow.
Yeah.
Like
I
the
see.
meadow.
Yeah. And Krai because of Piatra Craiului, the King's Stone, King's Rock, which is sort of the big limestone ridge close to us. And because we were just at the foot of Piatra Craiului, that's why we called the male Krai. And the female Pojana, because it was also Pojana Brașov and Pojana Mărului in the vicinity.
Now, speaking of Pojana Brașov and animals, I understand, or I have a feeling that the brown bear and black bear population is increasing in Romania. and is to some extent of some threat to the community. Now, I would say that only because when they have brown bears, I don't know if it's brown or black bears, that are walking around Poyana Brasov, they sound the alarm on everybody's telephone, like watch out for the bears. Has that population grown, and is it a threat to anybody? And which is it, the brown bear or the black bear?
First of all, it's only brown bears in Europe. We don't have black bears here. And there's the whole brown bear discussion is a very complex one. It's been all over the news now, and I can just tell you that when I came in the 90s, there were brown bears in Poyana Brasov as well. There were brown bears at the garbage dumps and whatever. So just subjectively, I would say not much has changed. But then, of course, many things have changed because we are using the landscape differently nowadays than we did, 30 years ago. So people by then did not go into the forests, and there was hardly anybody, biking or trail running in the forest. So there was much fewer interactions between people and bears by then. There was also no social media. So nowadays, every single bear that shows up somewhere is going to be posted somewhere on social media. So subjectively, yes. I mean, everybody thinks bear populations have exploded in the past years. Maybe they have increased. There's no, true public data available for that. But I think way more important is how we deal with this these bears that are causing conflict, or where we have these interactions, because these things have increased. So these areas where people suddenly bump into bears definitely are nowadays more than they used to be, 20, 30 years ago. And this is something that we need to tackle.
I want to go back to the idea of conservation, because I think it's a very important idea. It's certainly an idea that motivates most of us in the West to support projects like this. How do you both define conservation in your mind? What does it mean to you?
Well, conservation is definitely not something that you can take individually from whole society, from people around and so on, because it's. I mean, unless you go somewhere, whatever, to northern Canada or so, where you have no people for hundreds and hundreds of miles. You can do that, but not anywhere in Europe, because in Europe, you always have people around, you always have people using that landscape. And so conservation of nature, conservation of wildlife, conservation of birds, of anything is only successful if people like the idea and people support it. So when we started our initiative, we focused on buying land, what we mentioned earlier, and by now we have purchased about roughly 50,000 acres. So that's about 10% of the overall Fagarash Mountains. But we now consider that this is not the most important thing anymore. But if we buy another 5,000 or 10,000 acres, that doesn't make the national park. And that doesn't, I mean, that's important for this particular hectareage, but it's not, important sort of in the overall picture. In the overall picture, the important thing is that the local communities see that they have a better life if this area is protected. Because especially now with climate change, and we haven't tackled that yet, and what Barbara just mentioned about the bears, climate change is also a big driver of all these issues. Because when we have now today, we got in the morning, we got some pictures sent on the phone from bears that are already out of hibernation. If you would have gone 30 years ago, that would have been impossible that in February, early mid-February, you have bears running around. Now with climate change, this is all happening. And so a big protected area can support local communities to deal with climate change, because if it's a drought, there is still, the big forests will still be able to provide drinking water in a constant way to local communities. If there's very, very heavy rainfalls, a protected forest will be able to buffer these heavy rainfalls, and will prevent major floods happening. Landslides, that we that we have in other parts of the world. The heavy or when it's really, really hot, then these mountains are also, cooling the area. So there's a lot of benefits just from the pure protection. But then it's also, if you look, sort of wherever there is an iconic national park, these national parks are always the economic engine of development all around this area. I mean, if you look at Yellowstone, I think it's always every year between 3 and 4 million visitors, and the economic impact for all the communities around is probably, I would say, 90% of all the economy is made up by tourism and by the national park. And this is something, I mean, we totally understand, many of these local communities here, they're very, very skeptical. They have been told so many times that this is now the big new thing and this is the idea, and then nothing happened. So we're totally aware, and we totally understand that they are sort of a bit reluctant to go into that. But I think step by step we can prove that a national park conservation is really in their interest, and that this is something that will really enhance their life and make it worthwhile to stay in the area and live in the area. Because we have the main problem in all these rural areas for people is there's a lack of jobs. There is hardly any income opportunities. There is no education, or there's no education. There is education, but it's not on a very high level. There is no social or medical services sufficiently in place. And so, the young people are leaving because they don't see the future there. If there is something that really creates income opportunities, then it's worthwhile staying at home.
I know that you have hired about a couple hundred people there, locals, and then you have other people that come on in. But there's one statistic that was in your formal materials that struck me, and I thought it was very interesting. It says the Figueras forest takes 4 tons of carbon per hectare out of the atmosphere each year, which seems like a stunning, reason to have forests just from the get-go. But give me a sense of what that means in terms of how much of a dent is that in terms of of the job that Mother Earth or our population has to do. Taking 4 tons of carbon per hectare out of the atmosphere, it's a sizable take, right?
This 4 tons of carbon, that is actually not even the right number. The forests are taking out even more. But what these 4 tons refer to is compared to a forest that would be harvested, just by leaving this forest there, we have an added value of 4 tons per hectare per year. So it's actually even more. And this is really what is so important in this whole discussion, because forestry is often considered, and rightfully considered, a sustainable way of resourcing whatever building material or even firewood. But we really have to think carefully about how we are using wood in general, or what kind of wood we are using, because these trees that are already standing there, that have a certain age, they are incredibly important for all the other values, all the other ecosystem services like biodiversity and also carbon storage. I mean, wood will always be, and timber will always be an important resource, and it should have its place. There should be forests that can be harvested in a sustainable way. But looking especially at these mountain forests that have a certain age and have and are also very big in surface, they are corridors, they have so many more values than just the pure timber. So this is something why it's really, really important to protect them. Not even talking only about virgin forests, where, this is anyway no discussion about virgin forests.
It's a very interesting dilemma, because listening to as an American, I know the New York Times has covered you as well. To American ears, this is a gift, a fantastic initiative. But you're in an environment where there's a lot of skepticism. You're foreigners, technically speaking. You have people that sort of want to do it their way. You have loggers who are threatening. And to some extent, it's an educational process locally, right, in terms of getting this done. In terms of the economic aspect, you mentioned tourism, which I think is a very important point. I know that in Chile, they make a point of not to develop hotels too much and roads and stuff. There are a lot of dirt roads rather than paved roads. And that's the same thing you have to be wary and mindful of, is how you bring tourists in there or near there so they can go into the lands, enjoy them, see them, participate in the eco life there without damaging it. Give an idea of how tourism could work in an environment that you're trying to secure in a bigger way.
I mean, our big advantage is that the Fagarash Mountains are so huge. So it's not, you know, that we have a small area and then we have a lot of visitors, and what do you do there? So I think we can still develop tourism and nevertheless, you know, protect 95-98% of the surface. Especially since you know, all the villages, as we mentioned, are outside the Fagarash Mountains. So we can really you know, use the Fagarash Mountains as a main attraction. So this is important. You know, if these Fagarash Mountains are not a national park, they're not considered sort of as this really wild place, then people would probably not go there. I mean, if you look at Yellowstone, you know, I think more than 90% of the surface is hardly ever visited by people. So there's a few roads, there's a few places like, you know, the Old Faithful, where you have tens and hundreds of thousands of people visiting, but there's huge areas where there is nobody going. But still, you know, it's Yellowstone as the icon that makes people go there in the first place. And this is the same thing here with the Fagarash Mountains. The Fagarash Mountains, you know, if we manage to protect them properly, they would be the attraction. But then a lot of the tourism facilities actually should be around the villages. There should be, of course, you know, some possibilities to also visit this wilderness, and that should be on several levels. It shouldn't be just, you know, for sort of a very exclusive clientele that are able to pay a lot of money. There should also be the possibility, you know, for people that don't have those thick wallets to go and visit. But I think most people don't even want to put a backpack on and you know, hike 5 days through the mountains and carry everything with them. Who wants that should have the possibility. But most people, you know, want to sort of have the comfort of a nice guest house. They want to do, you know, a 2 or 3 hour hike, and that can be all done sort of at the periphery of this future park. And then, you know, luckily there's also beautiful hills and mountains around where you can have a beautiful view into the Fagarash Mountains, so people can still see it, and but they can, you know, they don't necessarily need to go all over the place in order to experience it. And then you know, it's also for the local communities, it's much more beneficial, because you have the local cafe, you have you know, mountain bike rental, you have you know, some other facilities locally, you got a restaurant for the evening and so on. So people can make actually more money if the visitors stay in and around the villages, and just, you know, sort of for a few hours go into the park and then come out and spend the rest of their time outside.
A little bit like what you see in Chile, where there are lodges there, you can go. They're not luxurious, but they're comfortable. They blend into the environment. You have pricing that allows anybody to come along. In Romania, certainly in that part of Romania, there's a lot of tourists in Sibiu and Brasov. Those are big, important centers. So in that way, I'm optimistic. In the U.S., we have Teddy Roosevelt in the late 19th century. He was sort of the father, as you well know, of American national parks, and he was a very adventurous, courageous, exhilarating figure. Is there anyone in Europe that plays that role? It becomes, in a way, I can't think of any politician, frankly, that you would connect to the idea of the beauty of the environment as a proponent of the environment and of conservation. Is there anybody that you can draw upon right now in Romanian life that would be a public champion of what you're trying to pull off? I guess you two.
No, we're not public figures. I think, you know, we're waiting for that person. I think it's a unique opportunity, especially because and Teddy Roosevelt had sort of he was in a very lucky situation because there was still a lot of really wild land out there. So creating these national parks didn't hurt anybody really.
Yeah, that's
here it's a different story. So you always have to combine conservation with economic uplifting of these rural spaces. But I think the opportunity is there because these rural spaces nowadays, I think it's still about 50% of the Romanian population that live in rural areas. And if you look at the statistics, economically, they don't contribute much to the GDP. So the economy really is booming in the big cities, and this is where all the money is being made. But out in the countryside, it's very little. There's a lot of poverty.
yeah.
So we're waiting for this politician to come up and say, I'm going to be the one that promotes these local spaces, but we promote them not by intense forestry. We are not promoting them by mining. We're not promoting them by hydropower or whatever. We're promoting them by conservation. And this is, we're in this age now where you can really make it work because there's so much interest in ecotourism. There's so much interest in nature. You have the carbon, you can sell carbon credits. So there's a lot of possibilities where you can really turn this conservation and this natural asset into dollars.
Especially since there are other examples. I mean, if you look at Costa Rica, for example, Romania would have the potential to become the Costa Rica of Europe. And I think there would be open doors also within the European Union to also financially support such a transition if a country would really want to go this way. And I mean, I would not see any other country in Europe that could still do that. I mean, and we're talking now about the Fagras Mountains, but it's the entire Carpathian mountain chain that is going through, which has a lot of potential. Maybe the Fagras Mountains being the most spectacular ones because it's the highest mountains, but there's a lot more potential protected areas. There could be a whole chain of protected areas in the mountain areas. And so there's a huge potential for Romania as a country to really turn around the entire economy.
The thing that startles me a little bit, you mentioned Ukraine, there's all these things that draw people's attention away from conservation. But one thing that's always on front and center is the importance of adapting to trying to change our whole way we live, frankly. And we are besieged by these floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, record heat last year in 2023. But one gets the feeling that the world always finds another pretext or another world event to divert itself perhaps from the most important event, which is safeguarding our planet. One of our senators, Bernie Sanders, was just sent a letter, had an article published in The Guardian, it's a very influential guy in the United States, where he talks about the importance of keeping this matter front and center. And he raises it in the context of him being a 5-time grandfather and now a great-grandfather. Do you get the feeling that the events of the world pull the public's attention away from nature and what you're trying to do in conservation?
I think this is definitely the case if you look at the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, we had sort of in the late 2010s, we had high hopes that things would move in the direction now of green, of conservation. The European Commission has published the Green Deal. So everything was pointing sort of in a good direction. And then we had the pandemic, then we had the Ukraine war, then we had the energy crisis. Now, we possibly get a new Trump presidency, which, again, would clearly go in a direction that is anti-conservation. And what we feel is, like 3 days after or 4 days after Russia invaded Ukraine, the German government put 100 billion euro aside immediately for new investments into military. 100 billion euro. When the pandemic was, there was no problem to immediately put 180 billion euro for sort of economic aid. So, you feel like, okay, if these crises, which are bad, which is, a threat, of course, but I mean, the extinction crisis and the climate crisis that we are facing are much, much, much worse than that,
Yeah.
because they are long term. And I mean, all the predictions from the insurance companies show that they will not cost billions; they will cost trillions and many, many trillions. And so you really wonder sometimes, why is it that sort of these short-term things, because they're so um, so obvious at this very moment, that they suddenly trigger investments of hundreds of billions of euro, and then you have this real crisis that we are facing, and you feel like you have to fight for every dollar there.
Yeah,
And
I mean, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, I was looking at some statistics this morning on hurricanes, tornadoes, cyclones. It's not like earthquakes. It's not a new phenomena. I mean, they'd be keeping records on this. Volcanic eruptions, 5000 BC in Crater Lake. Earthquakes hurricanes in the West Indies in the mid-17th century. So it's not as though we're blind, but in a way we are blind. And even if you take all the eco conferences with John Kerry and others going there, they always seem to be tamping down. Who today is the biggest enemy of greening, making the earth more green? Is it the United States? Is it China? I mean, who would you single out among these nations?
I wouldn't single out the nation, honestly, because I think what the real problem is that, and that sounds, I'm not against democracy, not at all. I know all the advantages of democracy, but at the same time, I have the feeling that in a democracy, you cannot take any kind of these unpopular decisions, and it will need a couple of unpopular decisions if we want to change something as quickly as we need to. And this is why it's sometimes really hard to not lose hope, because we all see things have to change. And at the same time, we realize, these decisions have to be taken and they will be painful. Some of them will be painful because they request us to change our lifestyle, to change, the way we use the resources. And this is why, somebody that proposes that becomes unvotable. So I would not single out a single country because I think as a global community, we are all responsible for what's happening, and we probably need to act all in the same direction.
It's very difficult because things get politicized. In one way, you'd say Elon Musk has done a lot for the economy indirectly because he pushes electronic cars. And that has obviously probably contributes to the reduction of CO2 emissions. And other countries are now producing electrical cars all over the world. And if you add all that a lot, whether they're doing it for the benefit of the environment or primarily for revenues, it's a positive net gain.
Sorry to interrupt. We have passed the top of the hour. Just a quick reminder, and people have been watching on the live stream services. We do have one question. People would like to know how they can get involved. What can they do? How they can reach you? And then I'm going to let John wrap it up with everybody. Thank you very much.
Okay, good question. How do you get involved? That's what we need. More troops up there, and I'm one of them. So I'll come up and see you in Brasov.
Very
about
good.
this.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll be happy to do that.
The one thing is that such a project obviously is costly. I mean, all the support for the local communities, we're giving all the support for conservation, the reintroduction
Building
of missing species, the building of the infrastructure. That all costs money. So we're very thankful for donations, for financial support, but that's not the only thing. I mean, it's also the thing to show the local communities that there is actually what we say about ecotourism, about an alternative economy, is not just blah blah blah. This is something that is really serious. So we have created an ecotourism program where people can come, where people can experience this beautiful nature. The way we have set it up is that 70% of our revenues go into the local communities, remain with the local communities. We have set up a big food production program, which is based on local small-scale producers. So we support these local small-scale producers. They can get much better money now for their products. We help them to market that. We have this so-called food hub developed. And with the tourism program, we also use, all these products here. So it's also about visiting, about paying attention to that. The New York Times has just published this article about these ancient beech trees in Nukshwara, this community of Nukshwara, where you can adopt these trees. I mean, we've got the website, www.carpathia.org. There's all the information there. This is where you can see all the things, how you can get involved. And John, you'll be our first guest up here.
I'm happy to come.
Just to add here, I think what is really important is for people to see these places, and also if local people here see that other people appreciate, this beauty of the nature, it makes them proud. And this is, it's often when you're living in a beautiful place, you don't even realize how beautiful it is. You really sometimes need the outside view somehow to make you realize it's really something special. And I think this is very important.
Well, I think you both did a fantastic, persuasive demonstration. I know in a way it's a lonely task. What you're doing is a crusading job, and you're dealing with all kinds of global events far out of your control. But the fact that you've done it so tenaciously all these years, and the fact that you do have people coming to your side, and ultimately I think people will deeply understand the important contribution you're making in so many ways, even if they don't understand it totally now. So if people can, maybe what we can do, Luke, is get the website name out there as well, and see if we can muster up some help to the cause. But anyways, I thank you both. I hope you'll have a nice Valentine's dinner. And thank you very much for coming. And see you up there.
Yes,
thank you very much. See you soon.
Okay, so long.